Okay. Hi, folks. Welcome to the weekly SIG Autoscaling meeting on the 2nd of October 2025. Let's start with the agenda. The first one's from me. So this concerns cloud providers who want to support DRA. We are right now going through the exercise of trying to enable it in production in GKE. And are catching bugs and issues. And one of those was the old GPU readiness hacking custom processor was still acting on DRA nodes and making them unready unnecessarily. So we fixed that, but it requires an action from cloud provider integrations to actually tell the processor if a GPU is exposed via the old device plugin or the new DRA way. So right now, this is all delegated to the get node GPU config cloud provider method. Instead of setting the old, like if instead of setting the old resource name to NVIDIA, whatever, you set the DRA driver name, then the rest of the logic will know to not expect the custom resource and so on. And there was another follow-up to that, a question from Jack, whether we can do the detection of if a node has a GPU enabled via the array driver or device plugin or GRE driver. And I wanted to put that up for discussion because I'm not sure. So in GKE, we just went with a label. Like basically, you need to have the NVIDIA DRA driver demo set scheduled based on some label. So we added a label, and we use the same label to detect if DRA is sort of enabled on a node. Now, this obviously doesn't translate across providers. If we just use we definitely shouldn't use a GKE specific label for that. I think that's safe to assume. We could agree on like a cluster autoscaler wide label that then the cloud providers would again have to add to their nodes. But at that point, is there really any value in that being shared? Jack?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. I'll go ahead and answer that question really quickly from my view. I think we shouldn't do that, not only for the reasons that you described, where each cloud provider may have its own opinion about how to label a particular node that has been set up for DRA drivers, but in fact, every DRA driver may have an opinion about how to do that. And so in your original PR, it's assuming NVIDIA, but going forward,
Yes,
there might be different. Go ahead.
This is specific to the NVIDIA GPU driver, because this is the only one, that is sort of the only device that was previously supported in CA via device plugin. So we have a bunch of like GPU logic that needed to be adapted.
Yeah.
Other drivers are sort of implicitly out of scope because there's nothing to distinguish, right? Like we don't have the old way to distinguish from. So this is specific.
Yeah, so I just wanted to call out that going forward, we as long as we anticipate that possibility and just make a kind of like a public service announcement that really DRA drivers are, it's a Kubernetes API thing. DRA is an API defined by the Kubernetes APIs, starting with 132 and GA and 134. But it's important for everybody to internalize that all of these sort of like last mile outcomes, like labeling a node, all that kind of stuff is going to be specific to a particular DRA driver. At this time, in practice, we're talking about NVIDIA DRA drivers that will, maybe even as of now, be installed via the GPU operator. So I'm aware that there's work going on to integrate DRA drivers into the GPU operator, so it becomes a kind of vanilla outcome of installing NVIDIA drivers via that flow, and that's a super common flow. But DRA is flexible and we should anticipate eventually there will be adoption by the wider hardware ecosystem. Yeah.
If there's something standardized on the NVIDIA side, right, And if they bring the DRA driver into GPU operator, and we can actually rely on some label going forward, I think it would be fine to have like an or, right? Either a cloud provider specific label or the standard known like NVIDIA label, if that's available. But I don't know if that's the case today.
Yeah,
I
and
think that's like,
it could fall under the cloud provider to do this too. It's possible that certain cloud providers will give their users a menu of options for DRA support. Vendor A, vendor B, vendor C, or SKU A, SKU B, SKU C. In terms of like, even for NVIDIA, there are obviously multiple hardware architectures that are going to use. I think that's the plan of now, to use a common DRA driver interface. But the cloud providers might prefer to distinguish those from a node perspective, and so that could be baked into the CA flow for each cloud provider distinctly. But I just want to say thank you for doing that for GKE. I think it's fair to say this should be the reference going forward.
yeah,
I'm
we're
happy to
just
follow
trying
that
to
for
we're just
Azure and be
trying
this.
to get it working right now, so that, yeah, like that there's actually a
Yeah.
production ready solution and not just like a proof of concept that people keep testing locally. Right. So I take it that we can, for the foreseeable future, just go with the like deferring the detecting DRA enablement for GPU to cloud provider, right? Okay. There was also one more issue brought up since I have the floor around GPUs, which is related to hard coding the NVIDIA like device plugin custom resource, and that's, I think, in most places it's actually already like sort of fixed. Like it's again deferred to cloud provider, because we have the get node GPU config method, and then most places use the resource name that this method returns. The big exception is the place that the issue is concerned with, so the GPU readiness hacking processor, which indeed just hardcodes NVIDIA and hardcodes the DirectX. And that second part is the problem, because we can't just make it fully rely on the cloud provider without also making like extending this GPU config to possibly multiple resources, or sort of doing some sort like the cloud providers would have to integrate with that first. Like it's hard to fix this without, in a nice way, and without breaking backwards compatibility. So I'll try to come up with some idea and respond there. But like what you were suggesting, Jack, it's done in most places, apart from like this very specific load bearing one. And it would definitely be good to get away from that. We also noticed that while implementing the DRA equivalent, that the hard coding is there. So like I have that on my agenda, but not high priority. All right. So again, let me just highlight the call to action. If your cloud provider wants to support DRA, you need to start returning the DRA for GPUs specifically. You need to start returning the DRA driver name in from getNode GPU config. Next, Norbert.
Yeah. Hi everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Norbert. I also work with in GK with Kuba. So we have an idea about making resource limits more granular. Like initially, we were thinking to do that specifically for cluster autoscaler, but that API, which we are proposing, maybe also like useful for Carpenter. So I don't know, Kuba, do you want to share the doc or should I take the stage?
Yeah. Since I have the presentation, let me share the. It's a very simple API. Like on the CA side is pretty uncontroversial. I'm not sure how that sort of fits into the Carpenter, like how Carpenter does limits. Like we know how, we don't know how, like what the future plans are and the use cases. So share this tab instead. Right.
Yeah, cool. So the plan is to introduce a custom resource that would add the possibility to select an arbitrary set of nodes with a label selector and a set of limits, like maximum limits, which would mean that the nodes can't be provisioned if they exceed those limits, and also minimum limits, which would mean that the nodes cannot be consolidated below those limits. So yeah, in cluster autoscaler, we only have resource limits that are cluster-wide. As far as I know, Carpenter has resource limits that are applicable to node pools. And as far as I know, in Carpenter, there is nothing like minimum resource limits.
Yeah,
You
no,
can
there's
correct
no
me if
minimum.
I'm wrong here. Okay. So
Yeah,
yeah, as
so-
you see, that API is very simple, and you have a couple of examples here. So yeah, so basically, what do you think about that? I see, Jack, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to. So it seems to me like this is designed explicitly for the cluster administrator persona. So, like, workload authors would not opt into this. They would be subject to these limits that would be sort of. This is a way to conveniently allow cluster administrators to set scale limits, which would be
Yeah,
constrained by
I
cluster
think.
autoscaling. Yeah.
Yeah, that depends, of course, like how you configure the RBAC, right? But that's also that is also a consideration here, that we would like to allow only administrators to do that if they configure it that way.
Yes. Jonathan, I don't know if you are active on the call. I see you in the list. Is that something that you would be interested in implementing? Do you have any like use cases for extending the current limiting mechanisms in Carpenter?
Yeah, I'll let Derek chime in here too, because he's also a reviewer on the project. But I don't think we've heard anything explicitly. I'd have to go back and look at the issues. I'm curious from y'all's side, like what's driving the use cases here? Is it explicitly what's listed in this doc?
Norbert, I think you had more concrete use cases, right? Like,
Yeah, we had some use cases on the GK side. For example, like a filter limiting by machine family, by specific machine family. What I saw one ticket in open source cluster autoscaler where it was requested to limit the nodes by the zone, like putting a maximum limit per zone, something like that. I can send you that ticket. Let me find it. But yeah, those are like the example use cases.
Yeah, I think the main use case is basically you have multiple like custom compute classes or node pools in your case that have some of the same underlying machine families, and you would want to configure a shared limit for them. That's one of the use cases. Also, I think Miko mentioned during last week's meeting that another use case from their side is having a cluster-wide limit that is not applied to the control plane, but only to worker nodes, which is not possible today.
Yeah, that's a request that our users have had, and I also saw someone opened an issue on the or on the Autoscaler repo about that too. So yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, I think I could see utility in the cross-cutting nature of these things. I think we've generally told people like, hey, create a separate node pool for separate instance types or instance families, and you probably for GPUs you probably have isolation, so you could probably create separate node pools for those things. But I do think it quickly becomes more difficult to reason about the more node pools you have, and if you have cross-cutting, overlapping like instance families. So I get the utility in this. What's the concept of a minimum though? In this case,
it's for consolidation. Like a node is not consolidated if it would violate the minimum limit. It's sort of like a baseline capacity you always want there.
interesting.
we've always had this in Cluster Autoscaler, both for the a node count inside the single node group and cluster wide.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
basically this is up for consideration. We would appreciate a review, and we should decide on whether this should be shared or if it's only applicable to Cluster Autoscaler.
Sounds good.
Perfect, thank you. Derek?
Yeah, I want to follow up on the instance family maximum selector. Is that because they're like GPU instances, or like there's something special about them? Like why would you want to limit a specific instance family from like a customer perspective?
Let's say you have for example, you have preferences for machine families, right? And you prefer like some instances that are more cost effective. You still want to fall back to more expensive machines if they're available, if the first ones are not available, but you don't want to create too many of them, for example.
Interesting.
I think that GPU also can be a case here.
Because if it's the GPU case, you could limit it via like the resource, right? Where you could say, I only give me a maximum, or I want a minimum of this many GPUs or whatever. The whole instance family thing, I'm not sure if.
So this is specifically, as Jack mentioned, for sort of the cluster administrator persona. So it's more like, as the cluster administrator, you want to make sure that your application teams don't exceed some limits on the hardware, rather than you're an application owner and you want to configure something for your workload. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm following.
Okay. Any other comments? The doc is up for comments. Like anybody in the SIG group can comment, so feel free to. And next one, let me switch the tab. Let me go. The last point about the cloud provider change, right?
Yeah. So I did what I said I was going to do last meeting, and I wrote a new patch that that allows cloud providers to inject custom node scale down processors, and it seems to be working the way I expected to. And I think this is probably a better solution because it doesn't add a new interface. I will note that what I did change is that instead of scoping just the auto scaling options and sending them to each cloud provider, I'm now just sending the whole structure, the auto scaler options. And I've added one function to allow injecting the processors to be easier. I figure if we want to expand that in the future, we can. I don't know if it's too wide right now, but like obviously people could break it, but this gives people options.
I saw I briefly looked through the PR. Like the approach is very extensible and could solve like a wide array of issues, like similar like class of issues in the future, right? You don't want to roll your own fork. There's already a processor in the CA code base, is just not enabled or configured how you want it to, and you do that. Yeah, like we actually have like one upcoming reviewer, so they'll do a first pass and then I'll review. One like small point there is that the autoscaler options tract is horrible. Like it's clearly not options. It is a different thing, and we'll be refactoring that probably pretty soon. But these changes don't meaningfully hinder the refactor or anything, so we can just I think the approach is all good.
Well, so I guess to support the upcoming refactoring, because this was something I thought about, do you want me to make a new structure that we could pass to the cloud providers and then we can hide some of the values?
I think like if you're up for that, separating the options from the actual components doing things right in there would be very beneficial. But let's maybe I'll do a first round of review,
Okay.
and maybe suggest something that because we've already sort of thought of this refactor a small bit.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
and thanks
you could
for-
refactor it
Thanks for
now.
the
with-
challenge. It's
Yeah.
a very good direction to go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to share it, and like I'm gonna keep I'm testing it and continuing to work on. I have another patch that I want to do for the other bug that I was working on. So yeah, thanks. Any review would be great.
Okay. Any comments on that? Anyone? Okay. Anything else from the floor? All right. Thanks all. See you next week.
Thanks. Later.